A very good evening and welcome to Weekend Dialogue on Biz Roundup. Tonight on the show we have with us Mr. Michael Preiss, who is the Director and Economic Advisor for Ceylon Asset Management, joining us. He's visiting Sri Lanka shortly. He is based in Singapore, so I wish to thank you for joining us on our program.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start off talking about your experience in Sri Lanka. You've been here for the past 10 years, on and off in Sri Lanka, witnessing the developments in the country during the war and of course in the post-conflict scenario right now. And now how do you look back at the developments and what do you think of Sri Lanka's prospects in the years to come?
Look, I think the prospects for the years to come are very exciting. But I suppose coming to this forecast about GDP growth, usually what happens is when an economy starts to move, like the Sri Lankan economy did after the war, it often surprised to the upside. And we saw this on the GDP numbers. GDP came in much better than expected, but more importantly, if you think about it, the stock market for 2 years in a row was among the best performing stock markets in the world and almost went up 200–300% plus. So I suppose that has surprised many people, not just locals, but also foreigners very much. And I suppose at that time, there was a question, especially among foreign investors, is that move sustainable? I mean, is Sri Lanka now on a journey that is looking forward and not backwards? So are we going back into war? Some of the unfortunate things that happened, can they be repeated? And I suppose now in 2014, we feel that Sri Lanka very much is at a turning point, because a lot of these things that were happening in the past and the preparation that have been done are now all pointing in the right direction for 2014. That's why we feel that 2014 is very much a turning point for Sri Lanka.
Right, you've always been positive about this island and its way forward. I would also like to ask you what your work is in Singapore and what you do there.
No, we basically advise on portfolios and asset allocation and investment opportunities, right? And again, we've been positive on Sri Lanka for many years, because to some extent I think this country has a lot of potential. However, a lot of that potential still needs to be unleashed. And I suppose this is where the recent infrastructure projects come in, and also, for instance, new developments in the stock market. I think a lot of positive development is there, but it can be further enhanced. It can be further beautified. It's a bit like Colombo. Remember, as we talked about, I've been coming for the last 10 years, and now you can really see a difference. With street cafes, the parks, the roads are beautified, and the new expressways and so forth. I think it all leads to positive momentum. But
of course, there's a lot of beautification happening. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of potential everyone talks about, and you did mention that it's how we actually unleash that potential.
Right.
How do we take advantage of that potential? And is Sri Lanka taking advantage of that potential that we have, or do we have challenges moving forward?
I mean, there are always challenges. I mean, the only person who doesn't have challenges is the one who's dead, correct? But having said that, I think it's positive challenges in the sense that I mean, Sri Lanka seems to be moving in the right direction. And I think this is also now what we see in the financial markets in Sri Lanka. If you remember, the last couple of years were a little bit challenging for the stock market. A lot of investors as well were a little bit sort of neutral on the market, and a lot of local investors have lost interest in the stock market. And we feel that is actually a good sign, and a sign in the sense that the market is potentially attractively valued. And this is why until recently our Ceylon Asset Management house view was actually underweight Sri Lankan stocks and overweight fixed income. So we suggested to clients and investors to be mostly in the fixed income space, where you earn very high interest rates and you accumulate more rupees. So when rates are falling, you have more money you can invest in the stock market. And this is exactly what we've seen the last couple of weeks, that the cost of money, interest rates in Sri Lanka have fallen rapidly to a level where now a lot of business people find it easier to take loans and also to potentially do more business. So that potentially would lead to the so-called re-rating. So we expect the fall in the cost of money to have a positive impact on the economy and more importantly on the stock market. And if you remember, this market has a tendency to surprise to the upside. In 2009, 2010, this market was the best performing market in the world, went up close to 300% plus. At that point, of course, a lot of people had second thoughts and said, look, can it be sustainable? Can it last? And then the last periods after that were sort of a consolidation period, correction, right? Now, we most probably passed this, and now I suppose the risk-reward ratio is to the upside. And don't forget, if you look at the historic PEs, the price-earning ratios, when the market went up 300–400%, Sri Lanka was actually expensive in terms of valuation. The price-earnings ratio at that time was around 25. And historically speaking, I think the range in Sri Lanka is between 25 and 10.
Right.
Now, according to valuation statistics, the market here is around 11 times PE. So on a long-term valuation measure, Sri Lanka is very attractive from a long-term valuation.
Right.
Plus, if you consider that this economy is expected to grow 7 to 8% consistently over the next 3 to 5 years. So if that's really the case, then we could actually potentially see that the next 5 years could be, on average, the best year since independence.
While you're being very optimistic about our growth in the future, are we doing things right? Are we putting things right to go to this, targets and all that you speak of?
Yeah, I think we're doing the right things, but we're not doing enough. I mean, this is the whole argument of being.
What needs to be done to do enough to get there?
I mean, for instance, the government had and the Colombo Stock Exchange had this very successful roadshow in Singapore. I think we need to do more things like that.
Right.
To basically share the message that Sri Lanka is open for business and that Sri Lanka also has very good fundamentals, and that to some extent the opportunity is now. And I think if you look at countries like Turkey and even our friends in China, the Chinese have always been very good in government public relations. And I think in Sri Lanka's case, we can potentially work on coordinating this a little bit more.
Right. So
I mean, the tourism authority, the investment board, and things like that need to have more sort of one voice, one coordinated message.
What can we learn from Singapore? Now, you also talk about tourism, which could be a major driver of economic growth for Sri Lanka.
Yes.
What can we really learn from Singapore going forward?
I think the most important thing is what Singapore did always very well was that coordinated approach. Right, I think this is what Sri Lanka can learn from Singapore. But don't forget, in the old days, it was Lee Kuan Yew.
Singapore learned from Sri Lanka.
Yeah, correctly. It was Lee Kuan Yew who came to Sri Lanka and said he wished that one day Singapore could be like Sri Lanka. And again, that is a very important point because this country has a lot of potential that we need to unleash. But I think now the time potentially is right for people to actually exactly do that. And it also means that you need to participate.
Right. And moving on to talk about tapering in the US, what is the impact on Sri Lanka?
Well, the impact on Sri Lanka to some extent is less significant for two reasons. Because Sri Lanka as a country, as an asset class, as a market is relatively speaking uncorrelated to Western markets and also to some extent to some of the other emerging markets. And because of the reduction in monetary stimulus in the United States, a lot of emerging markets over the last couple of months have come under severe selling pressure, whether it's Brazil, Turkey, India for that instance, right? And a lot of damage has been done. However, now in some of these other countries, interest rates are rising, whereas in Sri Lanka, interest rates are still falling. So in that sense, Sri Lanka is somehow isolated from that.
Right.
And also because if you think about it in the overall scheme of things, many foreign investors have not really discovered Sri Lanka yet. Many foreign investors have discovered India. If you think about it, only 10 years ago, the Indian market was around 3,500 on the Sensex index. It went to 19,000. If you do this in percentage terms, you realize that was a huge move because the world has discovered India. And the world has discovered a lot of the other emerging markets. Now, since emerging markets increasingly are considered to be a little bit out of favor, investors now increasingly tend to make more distinctions between some of these emerging markets and the frontier markets. And if you look down to real fundamentals and valuations, you will find that Sri Lanka actually stands out in a positive light.
Right.
For two reasons, because as you know, the stock market has underperformed here. I mean, when I speak to some of my Sri Lankan friends, they're all negative about equities.
Right.
But that's also because maybe the bad news is all what we call absorbed or it's priced in. So again, the market is relatively speaking attractive from a valuation point of view, and the economy is growing at very attractive growth rates, which potentially could only potentially surprise to the upside.
Right. You did mention that foreign investors have not discovered Sri Lanka, although they have discovered India. Is it that lack of awareness that you were talking about before?
Yeah,
and you mentioned that there's so much we need to do, road shows like we did in Singapore.
Correct, yes. It's awareness.
Is it just that, or what else can Sri Lanka, because this is the time we need to talk about what we need to do to make sure that we attract foreign investors into this country. So how do you think we need to do this now?
I mean, it's a bit like what they say about success. Remember, success is a big construction site, always under construction, right? So success is a journey, and so is development. And I think with regards to development, I think Sri Lanka has already done great progress. However, with regards to the capital markets and the financial markets, I think some of the recent announcement, like for instance by the Colombo Stock Exchange, that the free float will be increased. I mean, that is a very positive development because foreign investors potentially would like to see more liquidity. In addition to that, I think the announcement by the Colombo Stock Exchange that they will launch new products, like for instance exchange traded funds, ETFs, and so forth, is all very positive. So again, several of these measures put together grows the market, while at the same time you have more awareness, potentially would lead to, as we said before, to a re-rating of the market.
Right. Before we wrap up, I think we need to talk a little more about Ceylon Asset Management. You all have had a lot of ideas in Sri Lanka, of course, having a lot of future plans. So what products do you all have in the pipeline for your investors, for your clients?
I mean, our core offering is basically a based product that makes it possible for everybody to participate in the stock market. Because you see, especially in those countries that have done well economically, there was always a very high participation among the average person in the stock market, right? I mean, one of the reasons why America is still the largest economy in the world is because many people are actually participating in one way or another in the stock market.
Right.
And one way to do this is through index funds, so that every small investor can participate. But more importantly now, we're also working on listing some of our funds on the stock exchange. So this whole project with regards to exchange traded funds, ETFs, and with regards to foreign investors, we are working on a Ceylon dollar bond fund. Because I think this is also important with regards to capital markets development, that Sri Lankan companies and Sri Lankan banks increasingly go and raise money offshore. So again,
that has also been the concern of the government and the Central Bank of Sri Lanka.
Right. And hence the investment, I mean, Invest Sri Lanka conference in Singapore, where also your central bank governor made a very compelling argument, pointing out a lot of the positive fundamentals in Sri Lanka. And then again, it was a space in which Sri Lankan companies could meet with investors in Singapore and international investors to actually promote Sri Lankan companies. So again, by more bond issues, Sri Lankan banks and so forth, hopefully will help promote Sri Lanka as an asset class.
Right.
And again, Sri Lanka always has been overlooked and under-researched, but now hopefully that will change going forward.
Right. So I think that's all the time we have on Weekend Dialogue, but thank you very much, Mr. Preiss, for joining us on Weekend Dialogue. I wish you a very happy stay in Sri Lanka. You've been here for a week, I'm sure, but then success in business and of course all your visits. We look forward to seeing you often in the years to come.
Thank you very much.
We had with us Mr. Michael Preiss, who is the Director and Economic Advisor for Ceylon Asset Management, joining us on Weekend Dialogue. I'll be back with more on Biz Roundup right after this.